Dogman killed my wife. It started with scratching at the window. My wife thought it was just the wind, but I knew better. We moved into that house looking for peace. After years of city noise and sleepless nights, we wanted quiet, a secluded home deep in the woods, far from people, far from everything. We thought we were safe. The first time I heard it, it was faint, just a soft scrape against the glass, like nails. My wife, Emily, told me it was just the branches, the wind. I wanted to believe her, but something about the sound felt deliberate. The second night, it wasn't just the window. There were deep scratches on the front door by morning, not from a raccoon, not from a bear. They were long, too deep, and they hadn't been there before. Then came the growling. At first, it was distant, almost like it belonged to a coyote, maybe a wolf. But it didn't howl, it rumbled, deep and low from the shadows beyond the tree line, as if it was watching, waiting. And then we started finding the trees. One morning, Emily stepped outside to sip her coffee on the porch. The moment she gasped, I knew something was wrong. "John, come look at this." I stepped outside and my blood ran cold. The trees, dozens of them, were snapped in half. Not fallen, not broken from wind, but twisted and snapped, like something massive had ripped through them. The forest smelled different too, like damp fur, like rot. I wanted to leave. I told Emily we should go back to town, just for a few days. But she laughed it off, said I was being paranoid. That night, she even joked about our woodland visitor. That was the last night I ever saw her smile. We woke up to thudding against the walls. Emily sat up, clutching my arm. "What the hell is that?" I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. Something huge moved just outside. I could hear the breathing, deep, wet, guttural. Then the scratching started again. This time, it wasn't at the window. It was at the bedroom door. Inside the house. Emily screamed. I swung the flashlight toward the noise. Nothing was there, but the door had deep claw marks. The air smelled like wet dog and something rotting. That's when we heard it. A single distorted bark. Not a dog, not a wolf, something else. Emily grabbed my hand. "John, we need to leave, now." But before we could even grab our shoes, the back door slammed open. She ran before I could stop her. Into the woods, into the dark. I chased after her, calling her name, but the wind swallowed my voice. The flashlight flickered, and then I saw it. A figure, taller than any man, standing between the trees, its eyes yellow, glowing, its face twisted between human and beast, a long black snout dripping with saliva. It crouched forward, claws dragging along the dirt. Its breath was heavy, ragged, like it had been running, like it had been chasing something. "Emily?" My voice barely left my throat. The thing tilted its head at me, like it understood. Then, from behind me, Emily screamed, blood-curdling. I turned. Nothing. Just the torn fabric of her nightgown caught on a broken branch, blood smeared across the bark. I ran. I ran so fast I didn't feel the branches slicing my skin. I didn't stop until I was inside the house, locking every door, every window. But it didn't matter, because that thing was still out there, and Emily was gone. The police found no trace of her, no body, no signs of struggle. Just the bloodstains, the ripped cloth, the claw marks on our walls. They told me it was a bear, a tragic accident, but I know what I saw. And then, 3 nights later, her phone rang. I stared at the screen. It was her number. Shaking, I answered. "Emily?" At first, silence. Then, panting, heavy, like an animal. And then, a deep, guttural. The line went dead. I dropped the phone. My body was frozen. Because in that moment, I realized it wasn't over. Do you believe in Dogman? Tell me in the comments below. And if you ever hear scratching at your window, don't look outside. Story 2. Black White Boy in the Attic. When you buy an old house, you expect creaky floors, strange drafts, maybe even the occasional flickering light. But what you don't expect is something waiting for you in the attic. The Reynolds family was looking for a fresh start. A charming Victorian house on the edge of town, spacious, affordable, and tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It seemed perfect. Their daughter Lily was 6, bright, curious, always talking to her stuffed animals. So, when she started mentioning her new friend in the attic, her parents brushed it off. Just a child's imagination. But then, the footsteps started. Every night, around 2 a.m., they'd wake to the sound of slow, deliberate steps above their bedroom. But the attic was empty, always empty. At first, they thought it was an animal, a raccoon, maybe a squirrel, until Lily told them the boy in the attic didn't like them going up there. That was the first time her mother, Claire, felt uneasy. Lily started spending more and more time alone in her room, whispering. When asked who she was talking to, she'd smile and say, "My friend, the boy in the attic." Her father, James, asked, "What's his name?" Lily just shook her head. "He doesn't have one." "What does he look like?" Lily's expression darkened. She whispered, "He has black eyes." Claire tried to reason with herself. Kids have imaginary friends. It's normal. But the feeling in the house changed. The air felt heavier, colder. And then, one night, the whispering started. It came from the ceiling, from inside the attic. Lily wasn't asleep. She was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling, lips moving as if she was responding to something. "Go to sleep, sweetheart," Claire whispered. Lily turned to her mother and smiled, but her lips never stopped moving. James decided to check the attic the next day. The ladder creaked as he climbed up. Dust hung in the air. The space was cluttered with forgotten furniture and boxes left by previous owners. Nothing unusual. Until he saw the toy. A small wooden horse rocking gently back and forth on its own. He reached out to touch it, and something ran past him. A blur of movement. A flash of something pale thin, but when he turned, nothing was there. The dust on the floor, though, it had fresh footprints, small, like a child's. James came down, pale-faced, shaking. He told Claire the attic was off limits. They needed to focus on getting Lily to stop talking to whatever imaginary friend she had made up. But Claire wasn't sure it was imaginary anymore, and she was right. That night, she woke up to a soft creaking sound. The attic door was slowly opening, and, standing at the top of the ladder, was Lily. She was staring up into the darkness, her little body rigid, as if she was listening to something. Claire rushed to her, shaking her gently. "Lily? What are you doing?" Lily turned, her voice flat, empty. "He wants to come down now." Claire barely slept after that. She locked the attic. But locks don't stop ghosts. The next night, a strange feeling pulled her awake. The room was silent, but she knew something was wrong. She turned her head toward the ceiling, and he was there. A boy, thin, pale, crawling upside down across the attic ceiling. His limbs twisted at impossible angles, his mouth stretched into a grin that was far too wide. But the worst part, his eyes. 2 bottomless black pits, staring directly at her. Then he spoke. "She let me in." Claire screamed. James woke up just in time to see the attic door slam shut on its own. That was it. They packed their bags. They left everything behind. They never spoke of it again. Years later, Clary saw the house again in a news article. A new family had moved in, and their son, he had a new friend, a boy in the attic. Story 3. The Thing in the Basement. Some basements hide more than just old boxes and forgotten memories. Some basements hold secrets that should have stayed buried. Ethan never liked the basement in his new home. It wasn't just the cold, damp air that seemed to cling to him when he stepped down there. It wasn't just the dim, flickering light bulb that barely illuminated the concrete walls. It was something else. Something watching. Every night, as he lay in bed, he heard it. Soft whispers just at the edge of hearing. At first he thought it was the pipes. Houses settle, wood shifts, metal contracts. He told himself it was normal until the knocking started responding. One night, Ethan had enough. Armed with a flashlight, he made his way down the basement steps. The moment he reached the bottom, the light bulb flickered. He exhaled, switching on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dusty shelves, old tools, rusted pipes, and then something caught his eye. A shelf slightly shifted away from the wall. He stepped closer, stomach twisting. The house plans had shown a solid concrete wall behind it, but here it was. A gap, a dark, narrow slit of a doorway. Ethan hesitated. Then the knocking began again. There it was, an old rusted door, bolted shut. But why? His fingers trembled as he touched the corroded metal. It was ice cold. Then, bang! Something knocked from the other side. His breath caught in his throat. Then it happened again. 3 knocks. And something knocked back. He stumbled backward, knocking over a box. The flashlight flickered in his shaking hands. He told himself to leave, to forget this door. But a sound rose from behind it. His blood ran cold. It knew his name. He turned and ran up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut, locking it behind him. That night, he hardly slept. The next day, he called a contractor to check the blueprints. They confirmed it. There was no extra room in the basement. There never had been. But Ethan had seen the door. He had heard the knocking. He had heard his name, and the whispers were getting louder. 3 nights later, it happened. The door creaked open. Ethan woke up, gasping for air. The whispering was no longer muffled. It was inside his room. His body froze. A shadow stretched across the floor. Long, elongated. It stood in the doorway, too tall, too thin. Its head tilted unnaturally, as if adjusting to the dim light. Then, it stepped forward. And it whispered, "You opened the door." The house burned down that night. The firefighters called it an accident. Faulty wiring. But when they searched the remains of the basement, they found no door, no hidden room, nothing. Ever had a scary basement experience? Share it below. Story 4. The Whistling Man. Some people say curiosity is harmless, that it's just part of human nature. But sometimes curiosity invites something in. Lena moved into her small apartment on the edge of town to get away from the noise, the stress, the people. She liked being alone. Until the whistling started. At first, she thought she was dreaming. It happened every night, exactly at 3 a.m. A slow, deliberate melody, not cheerful, not sad, just wrong. Lena never looked outside, but the sound always seemed to come from right outside her bedroom window. The tune would play for a minute, then stop. One day she mentioned it to her best friend Kara. She laughed at first, until Lena told her it happened every night, at the same time. Kara stopped stirring her coffee. She looked around, leaned in close and whispered, "Have you ever heard of the Whistling Man?" Lena shook her head. Kara's voice dropped lower. "It's an old legend. If you ever hear the whistling, you're never supposed to look." Lena scoffed. "Why?" Kara's eyes darkened. "Because if you see him, he sees you too." That night, Lena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The story stuck with her. When the whistling began again, she pressed the pillow over her ears, but she didn't look. Not yet. Nights passed. The whistling continued. It never missed a night. Lena tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was just a random person walking by, but deep down she knew. Nobody walked this street at night, and it was always the same tune. Finally, on the seventh night, she gave in. She crawled toward the window. Her heart pounded. A cold sweat dripped down her spine. She reached for the blinds, and she peeked outside. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty street. A street lamp flickering. Then a man stepped into the light. His head tilted back slightly as he whistled. He wore a grin, a wide, stretched-out smile too large for his face. His eyes were empty, not black, not hollow, just nothing, as if someone had scooped them out, leaving smooth, pale skin behind. And then he stopped whistling. He turned his head. His face snapped toward her. And he saw her. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She slammed the blinds shut. Her hands shook violently. She backed away from the window, heart hammering in her chest. The apartment was silent. Then it was inside the room. The last thing Lena ever heard before the lights cut out was the tune. And it was coming from right behind her. Would you check the window? Type look if yes or hide if no. Story 5. The house that eats people. Some houses don't want you to leave, and some won't let you. When Daniel and Mia found the house, it seemed too good to be true. A Victorian mansion, fully furnished, dirt cheap, hidden deep in the woods. It's a fresh start, Mia had said, smiling. Daniel nodded. He didn't tell her the house felt off. The air inside was too still. The walls seemed too thick. And worst of all, the previous owners were never found. It started small, doors closing on their own. Furniture moved slightly overnight. At first, they joked about it. Maybe the house is settling, Mia laughed. But the house wasn't settling. It was watching. One night, Daniel woke up thirsty. He walked downstairs for water and stopped. The hallway was longer than before, much longer. The door to the kitchen was gone. Just a smooth, seamless wall where it had been. He blinked. I must be tired, he muttered, shaking his head. He turned. The stairs were gone. He ran his hands over the wall, solid, cold. The layout had changed. A heavy thump sounded from upstairs. Mia. He ran, searching for any staircase, but the hallway stretched, twisted, turned. Every time he blinked, the house shifted. Then he heard it. A wet, gurgling whisper. Daniel! Upstairs, Mia heard Daniel scream. She bolted out of bed. The door to the bedroom was gone. No, not gone. The wood had swallowed it. A muffled scream came from inside the walls. She spun around. Daniel's face pressed against the wallpaper, a sickening stretch of flesh and wood merging. His mouth opened in a silent scream. His eyes darted wildly, as if begging her for help. The wall sucked him in. Gone! Mia ran to the front door, locked. She slammed her fist against it. The floor groaned. She turned. The walls were moving, stretching, reaching for her hands, pressed out from the wooden panels, fingers clawing for her. Run, help me, it hurts, she screamed. The house shuddered with pleasure, and then the walls closed in. The last thing Mia saw was the front door vanishing. The house let out a satisfied sigh, and the whispers began again. Waiting for the next owners. Which story haunted you the most? Let's see who's the bravest in the comments.